Thank you, Jeremy. And what a wonderful thought to know that our God really is a God of love. You know, that's one of the shortest passages, and it came from the pen of St. John when he said, God is love. God is love. Of all the great things you could say about God, that he is forgiving, that he is sovereign, but he is love. And that's a wonderful thought, isn't it? And it is conveyed not only through our Father in heaven to those even in the Old Testament who actually spoke of the great supremacy of love. For the Bible, actually, in the Old Testament, we know that it was the first commandment with promise. And the second was like unto it, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that translated even over into the New Testament when a young man came to Jesus and asked him about the superlative commandment of all time. And Jesus told him that it was love. And so the apostles, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, would later write in almost every epistle talking about the love of God. Peter spoke about it. We'll look at some of the things that he had to say about it tonight. The Apostle Paul profoundly spoke about it in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And the beloved John the Apostle, the one whom Jesus loved, spoke about love in a great way. He spoke about it not only from the standpoint of God's love for us and that we ought to love him, 1 John chapter 4 and chapter 3 also, but that we are to love one another. When I think about unfeigned love, and I told you this morning that was going to actually be the topic of our discussion tonight. Unfeigned love means to love without hypocrisy. How many times do we say to one another, I love you? We all say it all the time. It's an affectionate way of greeting one another or even saying goodbye. Every time I call my daughters or my grandchildren, I'm always quick to say, I love you, before we hang up. Maybe the last time I get to say that, I want to say it. They say it to me. Sometimes they say it to me first. But you know what? It is a great way to begin a conversation and a great way to end one, that I love you. But it's important that we mean it when we say it. Sometimes people just flippantly say it, and the way that actually plays out in our daily life is like a lot of little buffers that we use in our conversation with each other. Sometimes we ask one another, we say, how are you doing? Most of the time, you're not interested in how they're doing. I mean, especially if you ask that and you get this long, lengthy dissertation about people who, go back from early childhood to bring you up to date to where they are. Well, sometimes people say things they don't really mean. So Peter, in the book of 1 Peter, chapter 1 and 22, speaks about unfeigned love. He says, seeing you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit to unfeigned love of the brothers. Now, unfeigned, as I said, just simply means without hypocrisy. You don't say it if you don't mean it. And if you don't mean it, don't say it. In today's world, we have a lot of people who claim to be children of God and claim to be Christians and claim to be loving people and fulfilling that great commandment of Jesus Christ to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I'm afraid that many, many times that what we call Christianity is often feigned, not unfeigned. But we must espouse an unfeigned, without hypocrisy, without a mask, believe it or not. Did you know that's what it really means? We all wear masks today. I heard the vice president speaking this afternoon and actually was talking about all the issues of the coronavirus, and certainly we're all touched by that and concerned about it. But do you know when you talk about being unfeigned, that in the original language means without mask. People would put on a mask to hide the way that they really feel and what they really think. In 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 6, the Apostle Paul says, by pureness, by knowledge, by long-suffering, by kindness, by the Holy Spirit, and by love unfeigned. That is the way that we are to live our lives. And then in the book of 1 Timothy 1:5, Paul writes and says, now the end of the commandment is charity, love, out of a pure heart and of a good conscience and of a faith unfeigned. Not only is our love to be unfeigned, but our faith is to be unfeigned as well. And then he says, in 2 Timothy 1:5, he says, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee. In other words, he's commending Timothy because his love and his faith is unquestionable, absolute faith. And he says, I know that it first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that it is in thee also. That's why it's so important for grandparents to teach their children about God. Audrey and I teach our grandchildren about our Father in heaven, but our children and, their fathers also teach them about God as well. It is true that love is a verb, and a verb without action is just merely a word. It really doesn't mean anything. But love is an action word, not just an attitude. It's not just something that you have in your heart, but real love that we talk about should be unfeigned. God motivates us through persuasion, long-suffering, gentleness, meekness, and that love unfeigned that I had reference to. Prayer in action is love, and love in action is service. And that's why Christ, by the way, in the book of John, the 14th chapter, verse 15, said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. Now, I didn't put it on the PowerPoint tonight, but actually 2 verses later, down in verse 17, he says, you know what? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's action. It's not just attitude. It's not just having something in your heart, but it's doing something. And we must have an unfeigned love with a number of people. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. Who are we to have an unfeigned love with? Everyone. Everyone. With the hurting. You know, we have a lot of people in our world that are hurting tonight. I know a lot of times that we're not hurting, we just kind of dismiss others that are hurting. We just say, well, I'm so sorry you're hurting, but we don't put our love in action. And so our love becomes feigned. And when we do not love as God has loved, then our love means nothing. In the book of Luke chapter 10, 30 through 37, Jesus talks about the Good Samaritan. He put his love in action. And Christ did also when he said in Matthew 11, come unto me all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But when I think about the hurting tonight, I think about the people that are so sad and overwhelmed with sorrow in their life. And there are many of them tonight. Many in this congregation that are hurting tonight. Maybe some of you are hurting. You wouldn't disclose that. But you're hurting down deep inside about something. Maybe something is troubling you. Maybe you shed tear after tear. Well, take note, the Bible says that God bottles up the tears that we shed. Isn't that amazing? You and I should find it incumbent upon us to find the hurting, to look for the hurting. Jesus said that we are to seek the lost, and I understand that, Luke chapter 19. But I know also that we are to search for the people that hurt with our unfeigned love. Now, obviously we love those, but then we are to love not only the hurting, but our brethren. You know, a lot of times we don't even know who the brethren are. Sometimes it astounds me when I say, well, I miss so-and-so. Who was that? Who did you say? I mean, they've been going here for years. And we act like, you know, it's incumbent upon them to come over to where you are and identify themselves. and you've been going here for years, and these folks are new, and you've never made an attempt to find out who they are. So you can't really love them with an unfeigned love because you are disconnected. How do you love the brethren? You don't know. Shouldn't we get to know one another better? Abraham Lincoln once made the statement. He says, I don't like that man. He said, I need to get to know him better. And I'm going to tell you something, folks. I think God's going to hold us accountable for not knowing who our brethren are. Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. We are to love one another. One of the great chapters of the Bible is the book of Romans chapter 12. There is no chapter in all the Bible that tells us the essence of Christian living more than this passage. Listen to what Paul says. Be devoted. You know what that means? Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Honor one another. I want to go back to that passage in 1 Peter 1:22 because I really want to stress the emphasis of this. He says, you have purified your souls all right in obeying the truth through the Spirit, but you've done it for the purpose and unto the purpose of showing that you have a love for the brethren that will not quit. It is unfeigned. It is without pretense. It is without hypocrisy. And he says, see that you love them fervently. You know what the word fervent means? It means hot. Hot. Deep. Burning love. Elvis Presley sang a song years ago entitled, A Hunk, a Hunk, a Hunk of Burning Love. You remember that song? You know what? We ought to have a hunk of burning love for each other in the body of Christ. I'm not being facetious in saying that. We ought to have brotherly love one for another. But then also, when I think about an unfeigned love, we are to love sinners. Romans chapter 5 verse 8. A lot of people say, well, how can I love sinners? I don't want anything to have to do with sinners. You know what? Christ came to the world to save sinners. Paul said he came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Paul said, I am the worst sinner that ever lived. And Christ came to the world and died for my sins. And because of his great love, and Paul writes about it and tells the church at Rome, he says, God commendeth his love toward us. And while I was a sinner, he says, but while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. You know what? The only way to love sinners is to reach out to who they are. That's what Christ did. I mean, he did. Everywhere Jesus went, he was reaching out. And one of the best ways to love them is to make a friend out of them. You know why I say that? Is because Christ was called the friend of sinners. The friend of sinners. We're to love weak brethren. You know, it troubles me and it bothers me. And, when I see people that don't come to worship, and I know people can come up with a multiplicity of excuses and so forth and so on. And, I could say the same thing. I'm 73 years old. And I could say, well, I fall in that little area there where, I ought to be careful about this thing. I just don't think I'm going to go to church today. By the way, my little granddaughter, Susan, reminded me yesterday of how old I am. We were going down, well, it was not yesterday, the day before yesterday. We were going down to Grapeland to get the watermelons. And Clayton was with us. We were in the pickup, and Dale and R.D. were in the other pickup to get melons. And as we were going down there, just all of a sudden, I said, boy, I'm sure glad y'all came along to help us load these watermelons. And Susan looked over at me and she said, Paw, she said, you don't need to be lifting these watermelons. I said, Why not? And she said, well, you know, we're all getting old, and you're getting real old, Pawpaw. She said, just think, it won't be long before you'll be going to the nursing home. And I looked at her with a funny look, and she looked back at me, and she said, but Pawpaw, don't act unhappy. They serve chicken broth. Chicken broth and applesauce. Oh, just what I wanted. But it bothers me when I see weak brethren. And you know, Paul says that we ought to really consider the weak brethren. And a lot of people are weak. They are. They're not strong. And so Paul in the book of Galatians 6 and verse 1 says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, listen to this. You who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. 1 Thessalonians 5:14, Paul offers again words of encouragement. He says, we urge you, brethren, admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient with everyone. But then he comes to another little statement here, and Christ does too. It's so significant and so difficult, isn't it? In the book of Luke 6:35, Jesus said that we're to love our enemies with an unfeigned love, without hypocrisy. But love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting anything back. Then your reward will be great, he says. And you will be the children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. You know, sometimes it's tough dealing with difficult people. It is. Sometimes people can make life difficult for you. And it's tough. But you still have to love them. You know, the Jews were constantly on Paul's tail. They were. I mean, all the time. He could never satisfy them. They were always trying to throw him in jail. They were carrying him constantly before the magistrates. He was making defense after defense before governors, before kings. Acts 26, Acts 24, Agrippa, even Festus and Felix. And they tried to make life difficult for him. But in Matthew's account of the gospel, chapter 5, verse 44 and following there, he says, but I say unto you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. For in that way, he says, you will be acting as true children of your Father who is in heaven. Now let me get down to something a little more home-basey here. When we talk about unfeigned love, husbands are to love their wives. People say it flippantly. Your wife says, honey, do you love me? You say, yeah, I love you. Does that sound like an unfeigned love? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Someone said, if you have a happy wife, you have a happy life. I don't know if that's altogether true or not. Maybe it is. Someone once said, you know, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But then you are to love your husbands. Paul writes in Titus 2 and verse 4 that the older women are even to teach the younger women to be keepers of the home and to love their husband. Wouldn't think you'd have to teach them that, would you? That's what he said. Older women, teach the younger women to love their husbands and to be keepers of homes. Dare to love your husband and love him well. But then you are to love your children with a non-pretentious love. Listen, without feign, unfeigned, no hypocrisy. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. The King James Version says, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. This translation says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Being a parent means that you love your children more than you have ever loved yourself. A lot of men never get that. A lot of mothers never get it. But it's true. You make sure that you love your children. You brought them into the world. And then children are to love their parents with an unfeigned love. 1 Timothy 5:4. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, listen to this, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Love your parents. It means you're concerned about their feelings. Their feelings. Sometimes parents are pushed aside. And young people don't want the responsibility of their parents, so they try to get someone else to assume that responsibility. Did you know that just a simple phone call to elderly parents can make their day? They didn't leave you while you were young. So don't you leave them when they are old. You consider their feelings, not your own. When you consider your own feelings above their feelings, that's feigned love, hypocritical love. And as I said, don't tell them you love them if you don't, or if it is pretentious with you, don't say, I love you. Love your parents while they're still alive. You will realize after they are gone how much they did and how much they sacrificed for you. So you make time for them while you're at liberty to do so. Someone said, love your parents and treat them with loving care, for you will only know their value when you see their empty chair. I've been in the home of a lot of empty chairs through the years, and I've seen children grieve over the fact that they didn't show love to their parents as they should have. Oh, they can cry crocodile tears at a funeral service. But there's a difference between shedding tears over a casket and loving mom and dad. But then last of all, when I think of unfeigned love, it means to love those who don't love you. You know, we all have people that love us, and there are people that don't love us. Through the years, and when I was a young preacher, I always thought, man, I'm going to make everybody love me. I'm going to do everything in the world to make everybody love me. Everybody's going to love me. Didn't take me long to find out, hey, boy, you know, no more said how far down the toilet I was. I realize not everybody's going to love you. And even Jesus in the book of Matthew 5:46 said, for if you love them which love you, What reward have you? You know what he's saying? You love those that don't love you. He said even the publicans do the same. They love those that love them, but they don't love anybody else. You still have to have a love for their soul, folks. If Christ loved their soul enough to go to the cross for them, then we have to have a love just like Jesus. I ask you the question tonight, is your love unfeigned? Is it? And Christ taught the superlative nature of love. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor even as yourself. Unfeigned love is defined in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Paul says, for he gets down to where the rubber meets the road here, and he says, for love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, does not dishonor anyone, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight, listen to this, in the evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and it always perseveres. That's what love is. So Paul defines it. Patience, kindness, support, humility and honor, propriety, sacrifice. That's what love's all about. Peace, forgiveness, proper rejoicing, in other words, rejoicing in the right thing, forbearance, to put up with, and trust. That's what love is all about. Is God first in your life? Is he? You know what? I think if God wasn't first in your life, you wouldn't be here tonight. I'm not asking that because I think he's not first in your life. It's just a thought. You wouldn't be here tonight if God wasn't first in your heart. I don't know where everybody else is, but I think I know the answer to that question. Or is he second place? Is he in second place? And if he's in second place, he has no place. God doesn't take second place. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's a love test that every one of us ought to take every day. Am I loving like God loves me? Is my heart filled with unpretentious love and affection for all? We become what we love. And who we love shapes who we become. And you will never, ever, and this is true, folks. It's true of the world. People will never have an unfeigned love until they get connected to the one who loves us. And that's our God. And we do that in the act of baptism. That's why I'm always quick to tell people that. I got connected to Christ 60 years ago. I'm so thankful for that connection. There's no greater connection. Prime time is right now. And for those of us who have distanced ourselves from God, and you know what? People that don't come back to worship, I know the ins and outs of it. Well, you know, they might get coronavirus, they might get this, they might get that. I'm telling you, folks, people get out and go to Walmart, if I've told you before, they go to Lowe's, they go to Whataburger, they go every place in the world. But where's your love? Where's your love? And the longer you stay away, and I'm going to tell you, I know what I'm talking about, the easier it is to stay away. You ever heard anybody say, well, I just got out of the habit? Yep, I hear it all the time. We ought to be like David. Perhaps they should also in Psalms 139 and verse 23. Search me, O God, and search my ways and my thoughts, and test me, O God. I hope tonight you're walking hand in hand with God. But if you're not, and you want us to pray for you that you might be stronger in your relationship with the Father, then we're going to sing this song of encouragement that has been selected here tonight. For those who may be out of Christ, who desire to come and surrender their life to Christ in baptism or to be renewed within your spirit, we offer this invitation to you. Let us stand and let us sing.